Okay. So this is one of the community conversations that we do online, and the reason for doing this is a lot of the feedback I had heard from people is not everyone has a chance to come out to the in-person meetings, and this gives an opportunity for people to ask questions, share your feedback on some of the topics we'll be discussing tonight, and it also just gives people an opportunity to watch this later on in the day or on a different day in case you can't watch it live, or if you just want to watch it in between at certain times. We'll see how well it goes to make sure we go into specific segments for this, and then that way we could potentially edit that out into specific segments and put them in even shorter videos on the website. As with all of our videos on YouTube, this will be available both on the YouTube channel, we'll post it on Facebook, and we'll also make it all available on the website, so you have an opportunity to see all of the videos we've done over the course of the last while. And so really, yeah, the point of tonight is to get your questions, your comments, your feedback. Casey is here with me over to the side. She's going to be keeping an eye on the comments section, so as your questions come in, she'll pass them along to me and make sure we get them covered. And if there's any just general feedback as well, we'll pass that along and we'll share that as we go throughout the night. I do have a few topics I can discuss. A little while back, I had posted, somewhat in jest, a comment on Twitter when I had taken a picture of the demolition of the Blue Chicago building, and I think I had made something along the lines of all I need to do to get a lot of attention and engagement is to post pictures of a demolished building. And because that always ties into my regular Facebook profile, it went on there, and actually we got a lot of comments from people who wanted to see particular items discussed. So I have a list of some of those items from when that post was made. But again, I want to get your comments and questions this evening. So as we go through, make sure you put them in on the YouTube comment section. If you're offering just general feedback, that's great as well. Make sure that it's all family friendly. We want to make sure this is live for everyone and friendly for everyone to enjoy. So what I'll do is I'll get started as we wait for some people to post some questions on the comment section, and I'll just go in the order that I had from the post I made a while back. So the actual number one comment that had been raised, this would have been about a month and a half ago or so, was around LRT expansion. And I actually don't want to spend a lot of time on that today because honestly, we have been talking about that for so much time, and I've done a couple of videos on that, including a dedicated, I think about an hour-long session that you can watch on the website that goes over a lot of what's been discussed. I've written a few blog posts on that too. So there's not a lot new to add really since the discussion back at the end of March. So I just didn't want to rehash that discussion when we've had some video content on that and had some write-ups on that. Other than to say that there's continued work going on. I know the city staff are meeting with, have already met with some of the businesses in the Stony Plain Road Business Improvement Area to talk about that one-way option that's being explored for that portion of Stony Plain Road between 149th and 156th Street. And so we will have more to talk about over the coming months, but I think right now we're sort of caught up to where we need to be. Of course, if there are any other questions that have come up in the last little while, feel free to put it in the comments section as well. I think we already got a comment, and I think, yes, Michael Enders had no need to, I think you'd apologize for being hard on me in the past. You have no need to apologize for being hard on me. That's part of what I expect when I do this. So feel free to be critical, feel free to be tough. That's part of the job. And as long as we can have a good, respectful dialogue, that's sort of the whole point of doing videos like this, the in-person community conversations, and just really trying to connect as often as possible. So thank you for tuning in, for offering some feedback there, and hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. So let's jump over to my list as we wait for some of those comments to come in. The number two piece that had come up was actually reference to bike lanes. And I thought it'd be a good time maybe to chat a little bit about this again, because I'd written a post on the downtown bike grid Well, it's probably almost been 2 years now. Well, it'll be about a year and a half. The post I wrote when council voted unanimously to approve the downtown bike grid. And we've obviously now since seen them. It hasn't been in for a full year yet, but we're getting close to that 1 year mark. And what we're seeing, we've been measuring the usage over time. And what's been happening is typically every 2 weeks or so, there's been measurements out. We are getting some real-time counters installed very soon if they aren't already up. And the idea is just to really get as much real-time information and as much information tracking the usage of that grid. So I don't want to spend a lot of time around why I supported it, other than to say I wrote a fairly lengthy blog post on it, as mentioned, about a year and a half ago about why I supported them. But if I could summarize it, the best way I can describe it is if you think back to just before the election in 2013, when the bike lanes on 95th Avenue were installed. Those were, my thought were, they weren't that great. I think they didn't really accomplish what they set out to do. It was a painted line on a road, took away a lane of traffic on a relatively busy roadway, and it didn't really fit anyone. So those that were biking regularly made them marginally safer, but really it didn't generate new riders. And I think that's the whole point. If you're going to do anything like this, you want to make sure you're seeing that uptick in ridership. And at the same time, seeing if there's a way to install that infrastructure on the less busy roadways. So as mentioned in the blog post, there's actually a link to a detailed traffic analysis of all of the roads in our downtown core, and specifically the roadways where we installed bike infrastructure. And the idea being that the busiest road that had a bike lane installed in the downtown core was 100th Avenue, and I think even at its busiest stretch, typically doesn't see more than about 10,000 cars a day. And just putting that in perspective, 95th Avenue, particularly that stretch between about 163rd and 178th, can see upwards of 20,000 cars a day or more. So if you're just thinking about traffic volumes and considerations as to why we would have put them on the specific lanes that we did, it was trying to purposely put them on the low volume roads that aren't being used by commuters each and every day. I just drove in tonight to City Hall, which is where I am right now, and as I'm sure most people do who drive into downtown and out of downtown, we use Jasper Avenue, we use 104th and maybe even 107th Avenue, depending on which part of the West End you live in. And I think what we found was that good balance of being able to provide safe new infrastructure without impacting the daily commutes for people on a regular basis. And the ridership numbers are actually looking quite good. I think the latest numbers I had just seen is that in a comparison of May last year to May this year, it was about an 81% increase, if I saw the numbers correctly, and that was about 4,500 riders that one day. And so I think that's an encouraging start. We're obviously still very early in this process. Calgary's now had theirs for a number of years. And for us, this is, as mentioned, not even a full year of operation, but we'll keep our eye on it. The whole point of this type of grid that we build is that it is adaptable. So if there are areas that aren't working the way we had hoped, or if there is a major impact, it's easy to sort of pop those up and move them to another roadway if that's what's needed. So again, if you're interested, I wrote quite a bit more on the blog post around sort of why I've supported them, but more importantly, I wanted to just chat a little bit about how I see them working now, and I'm encouraged. I think as somebody, and you'll note in the post that I now ride pretty much every single day downtown, and never thought in my life that I would ever bike every single day, but started up a few years ago, and it's very interesting to see just and I always hate to base things off anecdotal experiences, but as somebody that gets to ride it each and every day, I'm starting to see more and more people on that downtown grid. And it's great, even during the weekends when I'm coming downtown for an event or doing something. It's seeing more families more kids on those lanes, which is really the point. If all we were doing was building bike infrastructure for someone like myself who's going to ride pretty much every day no matter what, that's not really a good use of money. It's not really accomplishing what I think the objective of good quality bike infrastructure should be. The purpose should be to try and get more people to have another choice. Not to force people to bike. If people want to, great. The reason I do it now is because I save money. I'm allowed to, I'm thankfully able to be a one-car household now. Thankfully, you know, in really good shape because I get to ride each and every day. And so some of those are some of the reasons that I choose to ride. But, you know, I don't want to force it on people either. So if there are people who want to just stay driving, that's great. But when we see an increase in ridership the way we have, even over the last year, that's that many fewer people who are choosing to commute, whether it's by car, maybe some of them may have been by transit, but we're starting to see a shift there, and we'll keep our eye on it though, and make sure it continues to have the impact we're hoping for. So let's jump to, we did get another comment here, another question that I'll jump to right now. And that came from Michael as well. He had asked around whether church is no longer not-for-profit organization generating an annual revenue of 1 to 2 million. Should they not pay taxes? And so it's a good question. I believe what I understand of the property tax rules for religious groups and organizations, church organizations, is that they are exempt from paying property taxes, but that's a provincial rule and not a city rule. So it's not something that we get to say yes or no to. It's just something that we have to follow through based off what the province sets out. You know, I'd hate to give a firm they should or they absolutely shouldn't, just based off sort of one line, but you know, I think that's maybe a valid question that should be raised with the province, and might suggest it would be worth reaching out to the MLA to say, you know, at what point is a church or any type of organization that's tax exempt, if they're making large profits each and every year, should they be paying property taxes? It's a good question, and I don't feel I have enough information right now to give a firm we absolutely should be charging property taxes or we shouldn't. I'd want to understand some of the thoughts behind it, but worth maybe chatting with your MLA. So I hate to sort of push that question aside, but I just since it's not something that the city gets to rule on, I'm sure again we could always raise the suggestion with the province, but it might be something best initiated by them. You also had another question around if Chief Connect's non-renewed contract is connected to some challenges, I think, to harassment of a female police officer, which is currently in the courts. And honestly, I don't know. The whole idea behind how council interacts with police is that we're actually completely independent of the police. So the Edmonton Police Commission is the oversight body. They're the ones that choose to renew, and they're the ones that will do hiring for the chief and interviews. So I have no idea. We don't get to be part of those conversations, and there's a logical reason for that. The whole point of having council not part of those discussions is that as the group that will create laws that they will need to enforce, if we had that direct oversight, there could potentially be that risk of abuse of our position, and so that's why it's kept independent. So the Edmonton Police Commission is that separate body made up primarily of just everyday Edmontonians, with 2 members of council who get to make those decisions and have that oversight. And again, I don't even know the details about what you've specifically raised there, so I don't know if what's happening with that. If that's, I haven't heard of that before, so I imagine there's some other conversation that would have to happen about that, but I don't know the details, and so I can't really provide too much more of a response other than that. So I'll jump back to the list that I have, and The next item that had been raised fairly consistently in that one post was around project management. And if you've been reading along on my blog or watching some of the videos, you'll noted that I've done a lot of videos and blog posts on this. It's something I try to talk about as often as possible because for any number of reasons, the information doesn't seem to be getting out as well as I would have liked and I think would have hoped. So understandably, when the coverage of our major projects is in the news, they're not going to be talking about all the projects that are going well, all the projects that are on or ahead of schedule, on or under budget. That's not really that exciting. That's just what things should be doing, what should be happening on a day-to-day basis. So we get updates 3 times a year now on all of our significant capital projects. That would be every project that's $20 million or more, as well as a select number that would fall below that mark, but we would still deem significant. So oftentimes that would include things like neighborhood renewal, which is of course a really important project for the people in that community where it's taking place. Most recently, we asked to add the Jasper Place Fitness and Leisure Center to that list because, again, the work is less than that $20 million, but it's pretty important for those of us in the West End to have something like that. So we get this list 3 times a year so that it gives us an opportunity to stay on top of how our city staff are doing with regards to project management. It gives us an opportunity to ask questions, to understand that if a project isn't going well, because no matter, I think, how much you do, I don't think it's possible that every single project will go perfect 100% of the time. But the expectation is if something's not going well, what are we doing to try to mitigate the issues that have arisen? How's that impact the schedule? And just any information we can get out and share with everyone else. This was a change that was made a couple of years ago to formally create that reporting process so the council can stay on top. And I won't repeat everything that's happened really since about 2015, but if you're interested, there is a video that I did a few months ago, I think it was in March, around a lot of the changes that have occurred for project management within the city, and really go over the specific details. The main message I think I'll leave you with today is, as of our last update, which came in March, was that 84% of our significant capital projects, that 84% of them were on or ahead of schedule, and then 100% of those projects were on or under budget. And when I first started talking about project management, well, almost 3 years ago now, one of the things I had said is that as these regular reporting processes came in, what we wanted to do is monitor those results each and every time. And if we saw that they were staying fairly consistent, then it would give us a good indication that a lot of the changes that have been made over the last now 3 years have started to have that type of positive impact we're hoping for. And with those numbers, they are actually quite consistent to what we've been seeing. I think what I can recall over the last 3 years is we've been maybe as low as about 70, I think it's around 77% of our projects on or ahead of schedule. And I think the worst on the budget side was, I believe, 92 or 93% on or under budget, meaning there was about 7 or 8% that were over budget. So this has been trending fairly consistent right around that mark over the last 3 years. And so, again, really encouraged that that's what we're seeing. I don't know the best way to continue to communicate this. I'll obviously do it via the blog posts as often as we get the reporting, but it seems to be a message that we're still not getting out to the broader public, and that's a little frustrating because again, if the focus is, and we don't want to ignore the projects that aren't on schedule or any of the projects if they aren't on budget. But it's important to understand those with the context of all of the projects that we're working on. And I think that paints a much better picture of what's been happening with the city, within the city of Edmonton. So I'm actually quite encouraged with where we're headed. I'm encouraged to see that the results have been staying fairly consistent. And what will be really good is that this is still operating under an older design system that we had when it came to setting project schedules and project budgets. In our last 4-year budget, which ends at the end of this year, so from 2015 to 2018, the common practice was for council to approve both the detailed design work and the construction as a single budget item. And at that point, we were setting our budget and we were setting the project timeline. And I think the issue that you find with that is if you're thinking about putting in the context of, say, a home renovation, you get a very high-level idea of what you want to do, then usually you have somebody come in and provide a detailed quote around what they want to do, how they want to do it, and they give that price. And especially if it involves, major work where maybe you have to, if say you're redoing your basement, you actually want to tear down your basement walls and put in new insulation or wiring or whatever it might be that you're doing, it's hard to set a firm schedule until you've torn down that first wall to see, how's my foundation doing? Because maybe there's something there that you didn't expect when you tear that down. And I think that's really one of the lessons that has been learned over the last number of years, and what has started to change already, which is make sure that when we're doing this, we're setting our project schedules with the best possible information right at the beginning, and use that detailed information to help inform that discussion and that setting of a budget and setting of the timeline. And so while that has started, there were a number of projects that are underway right now and that were part of this last 4-year budget cycle where we weren't operating under that process. And so going into this next 4-year budget cycle from 2019 to 2022, you're going to see a fairly significant change in how we set those project timelines and set those budgets. And so my hope is that while the numbers are encouraging, I actually hope we can see those numbers continue to increase as time goes on, as we get more a better process in place for how we do project management. So because this is always good video, I'm going to drink a glass of water right now just for a little bit, see if there's any other questions that come in. No questions right now from what I see. I'm just double checking. I've got my iPad in front of me on Twitter and nothing on Twitter. And the good news is I have a few other items that I'm happy to discuss that came up. The next one on the list was actually with regards to infill. And there were a couple of different points raised during that discussion, so I thought I'd talk a little more generally about what's been happening and what's coming up fairly soon around that conversation. So obviously this has been a ever-evolving discussion, infill throughout the city of Edmonton. It started, I think it really started about 2008, 2009 when the council of that time was talking about their 10-year municipal development plan. And it was really the first time that I can recall where council said, we do need to encourage more infill within the city, particularly within the mature communities. And there were a lot of reasons for that, and many of the reasons still exist today, which is that if you look at many of our mature communities, we've seen pretty substantial population drops over the last 30 to 40 years. Most every one of the mature communities, with the exception of a few, have seen a population drop. I believe every single one of them have seen a population drop, though, when it comes to children ages 19 and under. Which has obviously has been challenging. It's been challenging on the schools, and we've seen that in Ward 1 with the Edmonton Public School Board undergoing consolidation discussions where there are schools that are going to be closing in Ward 1 because they do not have the enrollment that they used to. Sherwood School is one of those ones in West Shaftesbury Place that was identified for closure as part of the recent conversations that occurred last year. That includes also, I believe, Glendale School, and so the positive, we'll have a new school at West Lawn and at Afton, but anytime you're taking away those community schools, that's challenging. And this isn't meant to throw the public school board under the bus by any means. It's a tough decision. They had a lot of deferred maintenance, and when you don't have the enrollment numbers, I can understand why those conversations are occurring. And they're happening right now in the communities of Britannia, Youngstown, Mayfield, and Kenora as well. And there's also conversations happening right now in the north part of the city, and these aren't likely going to be the only ones, I imagine. With what we've seen in the changes in population, there's still a pretty large gap. And so, and the other piece, I think, when we think about that is that because these populations oftentimes are much lower than they used to be, even thinking about those local businesses that you used to have, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was a lot more common to have a local corner store or something nearby or even in the neighborhood where you could walk to go get some basic stuff that you might need each and every day. But when your populations drop as much as they do, it's hard to support those type of local businesses. And so that's an issue, and I think the other one is, and we've got the map here of Ward 1, and as you look at that map, and I don't think we have the whole map up on the screen, but if you look at, if you think about Ward 1, we go out to 231st Street to the communities of Rosenthal, Secord, Westview Village, and then even further northwest, the northwest corner of Hawks Ridge and Trumpet or Starling. We're pretty much at our borders right now in the West End. We're growing at incredible paces in the southwest, southeast. Almost every part of the city is seeing a lot of growth, and the land that we have available for new housing is quite limited now. And in some cases, the land that we do have, especially in the Northeast, you think about some of the great agricultural land. The last thing I think most of us want to do is say, yeah, let's take out farmland and put new housing up. And so this is the other struggle, which is that our population continues to grow as a city, and we don't have as much space to build housing. And certainly we have enough inventory for hopefully the next 30 years or so. But we already have to start thinking about that reality and what does that mean for how we develop and grow and build as a city. So that's a lot of what's put together the infill conversation more generally. And I think at least through a lot of the time that I had to door knock over the last, particularly during the campaign, but even over the last couple of years, because I try to door knock at least once a month and pick a different neighborhood in the ward, is that I think generally speaking, most people understand why the city is continuing to work on infill. And I feel pretty confident saying this, that I think generally most people support the need for the city to continue to work on infill. The challenge has always been what that specifically means within each of our communities. And some communities more than others have concerns about some of the, as that redevelopment occurs. What does that mean for their neighborhood? If there's a lot of new development occurring, and we see it in a number of communities in the West End where it's happening at a much higher rate. There's even just the amount of construction that's occurring can be tiresome if it's happening around you all the time. So over the last term on council, we spent a lot of time working on trying to fix and improve the infill process. We did that. We've changed a number of things over the last 4 years, and actually we've written a couple of posts over the years on the website that go over in detail all of those changes that have been made, and there's a link to the full list, and I would encourage you to go through it because we could honestly spend probably the entire night just talking about those changes alone. But I think there will just be a few that are worth highlighting, and I think for me, I look at something like the lot grading plan that we had, and the requirements to actually require a lot grading plan before issuing a permit in the mature neighborhood. That's not something we used to require up until about, I think that change was made 2.5 years ago now, but it's not something that previously was required before you got your building permit. feels a bit odd, but yet that's just the way it was. And so that's a major change that has been made. I think probably, to me, more important than anything else, and there have been a lot of changes and adjustments to the mature neighborhood overlay, which sort of guides how development occurs within mature communities, but probably the most important one is the infill compliance team. And they started up now, I think it's been about a year and a half, 2 years now, for the infill compliance team, and they are a team that's dedicated to responding to not just any complaints that come in through 311 about infill construction. Say if you're living beside something underway and under construction and they're not following the rules, there is a dedicated team. You call 311 and that gets sent to them. But this team also is doing proactive inspections to sort of stay on top of what's been happening and to make sure that people aren't getting away with not following what their permit allowed for. And it's been going well. I mean, the team's had a lot of work, which is not unexpected as we've continued to see more and more infill as a city. And I imagine the team will continue to have more work. And they've been enhancing the support for the team. So there's now a full-time administrative staff person who works with that team, which allows the team to spend more time out doing the inspections and not having to stay inside doing all the paperwork. So this is good. There's been an evolution on that, and I mean, again, from what I've seen, at least even just from the calls that I think we were getting in this office, we've seen a substantial decrease in calls. That doesn't mean that there's been none at all. There's still been the occasional call here and there. But it's been getting better and better, and I think it will continue to improve, because this is not something that we're going to simply just say we're not going to continue to work on. Being that I think you're going to continue to see a focus on infill development throughout the city, we want to make sure we are staying on top of all those issues. And I think that brings me to the part that I wanted to talk more about, which is where we're headed right now. So really over the last couple of years, the changes in terms of the increase in density were probably what many would consider more minor in the scale of either allowing the subdivision of a 50-foot lot into two 25-foot lots, or the allowance of or to be allowed to build a garden suite on any 50-foot lot instead of just on corner lots. So essentially being allowed to do 2 units instead of where there used to be 1. So what we've seen is that's a small change in density, but it took some time to get through and to work on, and I think it's started to make a difference. I actually remember reading an article just over the weekend on the subdivision of lots, and I think they were chatting with somebody. It was sort of in the central community. I think it was either North Glenora or Glenora, and I remember the person they interviewed saying, I think that they started to even feel different about the housing that's going up. I think that's something, I mean, again, just what I've been finding more as we've gone through conversations is that now that we've seen what a lot of this housing looks like, and most importantly, the fact that it's bringing in new people into a community, I think it's starting to shift that conversation, and that's good. But again, there's still a lot of work that we need to continue working on. So if you've got concerns, if you've got any feedback you want to share, always happy to get whatever you have on your mind there. And as I continue to talk, remember, if you've got feedback you want to share on any one of these topics we've been discussing, feel free to put it in the comments right now. Casey will send it over to me by text, and I'll read it as we go through this, because it just doesn't have to be me talking for the full hour and a half, but happy to chat for as much time as we need, but love your feedback on it. So I think just again closing at where we're at, or where we're going on the infill conversation, is that I think it's just about 2 weeks. I think that's when we're looking, or at least within the next month, we'll be having a conversation around what we're referring to as Infill 2.0. What's that next step for us as a city? How do we continue to provide additional choices, particularly within our mature communities, and at the same time trying to find that balance for everyone that currently lives in the mature communities? So one of the focus points in this conversation is what we would refer to as our nodes and corridors. They're already, so those are our main roadways or your locations that are right across from a major transit center or across from a major park space or school. These are locations that already, and for almost the last 10 years, have been allowed to be higher density than what you might see interior in a community. So, on that arterial road, you might see up to a 4-story condo building or apartment building, or in the case of where I live, right by the library, Jasper Place Library. I live in a 3-story condo building right on 156th Street, and then right across the avenue is a new 10-unit row housing development that's built, again, on that main road. It replaced 2 homes, and that's the type of housing that we're talking about when we're thinking about those nodes and corridors. To how do we make sure that type of housing can exist in our mature communities, and where are the right locations for that? And we generally know, again, main roads across from schools and parks, that makes a lot of sense. But the point of the conversation coming up is to really solidify that in terms of a policy. Because it is a gap that we have. We're fortunate in Ward 1 that we have a wide range of communities, going from the oldest community league in Canada in Crestwood that's over 100 years old to essentially communities that have existed for just a few years, like Hawks Ridge and Trumpeter and Rosenthal. So we're seeing such a wide range. But if you have the opportunity to travel into those new communities, particularly I look at a community like Rosenthal right now. If you go into Rosenthal, you're going to notice that you have virtually every type of housing already in a community that's only a couple of years old. You have your single-family homes on larger lots. You have single-family homes on more narrow lots. You have duplex or semi-detached housing. They already have row housing. I've liked they have one development overlooking one of the ponds where I think it's about 26 or 28 units dedicated towards seniors, and it's just a wonderful little development that they have there. They do have some apartment buildings, they have condos, and really you have every type of housing you could possibly need over the course of one's life. So it gives you that opportunity. So anyone moving into Rosenthal today would have the opportunity, if they wanted to live their entire life. They might not all live it in the one specific home they live in now, but there's going to be housing available that fits different needs over the course of their life. And that's always been something I've talked about when I talk about infill, and particularly, again, within mature communities. I look at my home community at Jasper Park, and we have single-family homes, and we have almost, with the exception of the building I live in that's about 10 years old now, we have 1970s walk-up apartments without elevators. And it's only just in the last few years that we have, my building that has an elevator. We have right across the street where I was just mentioning, where we have a 10-unit row house. But realistically, there's not really much other than older single-family homes and old apartment buildings without elevators. And in my community, Jasper Park, there's a lot of people who live there, who have spent a lot of their lives there, raised their family there, and are fortunate they're still living in their home. But as you start to talk to some people who have lived in the community for 30 or 40 or 50 years, and you ask them about what they plan to do if they wake up one day and can't take care of their home anymore, that's where you start to see that light bulb go off a little bit, and people start to realize that there's not a lot of choice in many of our mature communities for where we want to live. So that's, I think, for me, the lens I want to bring to the discussion that we'll have it over the next month around Infill 2.0, and how do we make sure we have that choice that provides the opportunity for a complete community, for somebody to be able to age within a community their entire lives. And it's going to be good. I encourage people to be involved. I know there was a lot of engagement leading up to the meeting that we're going to be having, and as with all of our committee meetings, it's going to be public, and encourage you to either watch online or come out yourself and be a part of that discussion, because this is going to be a continuous evolution, and it's important that I think everyone's part of that, because again, as somebody that also lives in a mature community, we want to make sure that as our communities are evolving, that we find that balance between making sure we have new choices and can bring in new people, but we're not going out of our way to make living your life more difficult in a mature community either. So how do we make sure we find that balance, and how do we make sure we continue to work on that? And that's a lot of what's going to be coming up in the near future. So I have a couple more topics that I thought I'd discuss. I'll have a quick glass of water again here, and yeah, if you're watching, and you have questions or if you have feedback, would really love anything for you to post in the comments. If you're on Twitter, feel free to post it on Twitter as well, because I am watching as we go through that. But I have a couple more topics that were raised in that Facebook conversation that I'll go over, and then if, as mentioned, feel free to jump in at any point in time, offer your feedback or comments. So next up was potholes, and it's always good to talk about potholes, particularly after winter. It's something that I think many people remember 2012, 2013 as particularly bad years. And I mean, even now there's still some roads that have some tough potholes, and wanted to talk a little bit about how is the city managing roadway inventories, and what are we trying to do to improve the overall quality of our roadway network, and then what we can expect as we go forwards. So it was actually in going into that 4-year budget, that 2015 to 2018 capital budget, that we made a fairly major shift to our arterial roadways budget. And again, just for definition's sake, our arterial roadways are what you might think about as our main roads: 170th Street, 178th, 87th Avenue, Weber Greens Drive, 215th Street, 142nd, all of those types of sort of main roads that often run between our communities that we use to get from point A to point B. And leading into that budget, we had been budgeting approximately $25 million per year into arterial roadway renewal. For a few years leading up to that conversation, there had been one-time increases for, I think, 3 years, maybe 4 years. So if you buy the previous council, and then once again, once the council came on from 2013 to 2017, there was again a one-time increase. But what we were finding, and we had a detailed report come back that suggested that if we only ever kept the budget at that mark, that $25 million a year budget, our roads were going to get progressively worse and worse and worse. At the time of that report, 18% of our arterial roads were rated in D or F conditions. So we rate our roads from A to F, and the goal is to typically have no more than about 10% of your roads in that D to F condition. So the first question that sometimes comes up is, well, wouldn't you want that to be zero? I think that's while that's an admirable target, you also want to make sure you maximize the life cycle of your investment as well. And so the idea is that generally, if you're at that 10% mark, each year a number of those roads that are in that 10% are coming and getting redone at that point, kind of brought back up to the A condition. And so what we don't want to see is roads sitting in that D and F category for a very long time without any type of time or any type of attention. So 10% is sort of the best way to ensure you're getting that full lifespan, while generally making sure your roads are in good or better shape. So, as mentioned, about 18% of our roads were in D or F. That number was increasing based off the level of investment that was being made each and every year. And that's when the recommendation came forward that suggested, if we want to start lowering that number, if we want to start improving the conditions of our road and making sure that we're getting the full lifespan and maintaining them the way we should be putting around $55 million per year just into the arterial roads. This does not include neighborhood renewal. This does not include any of the other. This is just our main roads. And so council did agree to fund that, and we started to see that improvement. That 18% has been coming down. It doesn't come down all overnight. All that 8% doesn't come off in 1 year. It takes time. But we are starting to see the overall improvement. But no matter how good and how much we put into that arterial road budget, we will continue to see potholes. The objective is that if your roads are being maintained properly, that it minimizes how much you'll see for potholes, but you'll continue to see them. And I don't want to suggest that there will be a point where there's never going to be a pothole in the city of Edmonton, although that would be wonderful. So what I always encourage people to do is that, when you notice that pothole, if you're obviously driving and you hit a pothole, take note of that location. You can either call it in via 311, you can submit it via email. You can also use the 311 app, and that gives you an opportunity, if you're not driving, of course, to submit it, and actually it geolocates that. So it's really handy. So it allows you to take a picture and do it that way. So this is, maybe you're walking around your neighborhood and you walk past a pothole that you would normally drive by. Take a picture of that with the 311 app, put it in. The crews do still repair potholes, and it's an important work, and that work will always continue. But the idea is that by regularly maintaining our roads and putting the proper investment into the roadways each and every year, that we will continue to see an overall improvement with our conditions. And if you combine that with things like our neighborhood renewal and with other road repair work, we actually put in quite a bit into our roads. And I know, sometimes I won't go back to the bike lane issue, but other than to say, I think sometimes when the bike lane conversation came up, people said, well, why would you spend $6 million on bike lanes? And we've got majority of people drive. It's absolutely true. In fact, the vast majority of people drive. But then we don't often sort of total up how much we spend as a city on roads. And over that last 4-year budget, we spent over $1 billion on our roadway infrastructure. And that billion doesn't even include the billion that we'll be spending on Yellowhead, converting it into a freeway. So I've sort of set that off to the side and just focusing on things like neighborhood renewal, arterial renewal. It's a pretty large amount of money that we spend each and every year on our roads, and it's by far and away the most we've spent per year, at least that I've been able to find on a per year basis, than we've ever spent as a city. And I think that's important because you want to make sure that infrastructure is safe, so that people can move efficiently on it, and that we have the opportunity to do what we need to do and get people from point A to point B. But I just thought I'd share a little bit about that, how the city's trying to look at this issue on an ongoing basis. I think there was another question on this that Michael had around just sort of the overall cost, and so I can clarify a little about this because I think when I talked about those numbers, that 25 million and now 55 million, when we talk about roadway renewal, we're actually talking about the either reconstruction of a roadway. So if that roadway is in that F condition, that means really tearing it up, tearing up the existing base and then redoing the base and then repaving. So that's not $55 million a year on filling potholes. There's still money being spent on filling potholes every year, but now that $55 million that we spend every year and what used to be $25 million is on new road construction or new reconstruction, if you will. And that's the idea. We need to put that kind of money into that. It's the same thing we're doing with neighborhood renewal. And the idea is that prior to neighborhood renewal existing as a program, we were lucky if we were going into communities once every 80 to 100 years. But realistically, if you want to get the full lifespan of your road in a neighborhood, we need to be in a community 4 times every 60 years. And so that first time is the full reconstruction, where we redo the entire base of the roadway and repave. But 10 years after, they come in and do what's called microsurfacing, where they put down a layer of liquid asphalt and to help just fill in some of those cracks and smooth things out a bit. And then 20 years after that, they typically do what's called an overlay, where they grind down 2 inches and repave, but the base still stays. 10 years after, they would do another overlay, and then finally at year 60, a full reconstruction. And that's sort of the approach we needed to take with our arterial roads as well. The timelines might be a little bit different, but the same approach, which is that make sure we're maximizing that investment, that we're actually getting the full lifespan. So that $55 million a year that I'm talking about is specifically for that. It's not about filling potholes, because yeah, if we spent $55 million a year filling potholes each and every year, that would be an issue, and it would then suggests we're not doing enough on the roadway maintenance and reconstruction. So definitely something that's top of mind for that. So we'll see if there's other questions coming. Yeah, there's, oh, perfect. Yes, Allison has asked a little bit about the marijuana or cannabis licensing framework policies. So we've been talking, this has been a fascinating topic, one that I definitely never thought I'd be talking about when I first ran for city council back in the day. But yeah, I've learned a lot. And so what we've gotten, where we're at so far, is most of the conversation has been focused on the land use separation distances between cannabis stores, separation distances from a store to, say, a park or a library or a hospital. And we've done 2 readings of a land use bylaw, with a third, I believe, a third reading still to come within the next few weeks, actually, I believe, the third reading. So just at a high level, there's the first thing to note is that we have the province has their own set of rules and regulations around this, and they set their own distances, their own separation distances that they have in their rules that we have to, at a minimum, abide by. And then we have the opportunity, if we choose, to enhance them or strengthen them if we see fit. So as an example, we'll start on actually the hours of operation. The province has allowed stores to be open, I believe the provincial rules were 10 a.m. to 2 a.m., if I recall correctly. We as a city started off by saying 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. And specific to that, and actually pretty much everything we've been talking about, separation distances, and what we'll be talking about later this week on public consumption, a lot of the advice we've been receiving from a number of people who have been involved, and this, we had people like former Deputy Prime Minister Anne McClellan, who is leading the task force, came out to one of our committee meetings to talk about the work that they had been doing and offer advice. We had a representative from, I believe it was Oregon, who had been a state legislator, and he offered, so he's been, I think, consulting in some cases, but came in this case to offer advice. Alberta Health Services has been out to offer their perspective on these issues. And every single group and person that's had experience has really given us one common piece of advice, and that is to say, start off a little more conservative, give it a year, give it 2 years, see how things go, and then adapt, make changes. And the reason for that advice is, I guess, in Colorado, where they were, I believe, the first in the U.S., they started off very loose on their rules, and in some cases have been trying to tighten up some of their rules. It's been very challenging because they started off too loose. And so that's been very much the approach for what we've been given. And I think, speaking for myself, that how I've looked at this, which is that this is a very new world for us, and there's a lot we don't know, and I am extremely confident that we will not get this right all at once. And so I like the idea of saying, let's start off a little more cautious, take a year, measure everything, see how it goes, and then let's adjust. Let's be willing to adjust too, because again, chances are not everything will be right that first time. So that's been the approach on store hours. That's going to be, I think that's generally speaking how I feel that the separation distances were taken and were approached. So we have a 200-meter separation distance between the stores themselves, as an example, and it's actually a lower radius, a smaller radius than what we have currently for liquor stores. And we're looking at actually that policy discussion as well. But I think there had been a push of saying, well, don't put any type of separation distance and sort of let the market decide, which I think there's some merit to that discussion. At the same time, we want to make sure we fully understand the impact of the stores. Would they have any negative impact if you had too many clustered together? Tough to say right now. We don't have that information yet. So that's really been even the approach on separation distances, separation distance from parks, from schools. That's been the approach, and I think that's likely to be the approach for the first year. And then we will see how things go and then make the necessary adjustments as we go on. So the other piece, though, that is coming up on this, and I'm just going to have a quick drink here, is the public consumption rules. And that actually comes up this week, and we definitely have some more to discuss on this. So again, there were a few different approaches recommended, and different jurisdictions have gone in different approaches. I think Calgary has essentially gone to, I believe, essentially a full public ban. And I don't want to speak for them, but my understanding is that they have a very, very strict set of rules, very much mirroring what exists, I think, for alcohol today. Some would say, well, you could go to the approach of just essentially applying the smoking rules as we know them today, or you could take the smoking rules and put in some additional restrictions. And that was the recommendation we made. There's been there will still be a full council discussion on this, but that was sort of the initial suggestion, which is that why don't we look at how we currently treat smoking and then apply some more strict regulations to that, but don't go to an outright ban. So trying to find that sort of middle ground between smoking rules and alcohol. And I think so we'll have a discussion, I think it's this Thursday, or this Wednesday, I believe, actually, on this. And I don't know what the final outcome will be, but the recommendations in the report do talk about taking that more, again, cautious approach at the beginning, applying those more strict rules sort of beyond this. So if this is the alcohol rules and if this is the tobacco rules, be on this side of the spectrum to start, and then see how it goes and adjust accordingly. And of course, I think the other piece that will potentially change this conversation quite a bit is when edibles are allowed to be consumed, which is not starting on day one, because you might treat combustibles, so actually smoking or smoking of cannabis, differently than you treat an edible, and because it may be more challenging to in fact enforce a public consumption ban or have really strict rules on edibles if you're unable to actually tell that's different than a non-cannabis version of what that product is. So that's going to play an added piece to this, and so I think we've got a lot to deal with that, a lot to still answer. We should be ready. The final piece, and I should note, was just around the costs, and I don't know if that was part of what you want to discuss, but there's costs on the licensing for cannabis retail stores. And really where we're at for that is that we are definitely, and I mean, there's a wide spectrum. There are some who charge the exact same fees as any other business license, and there are some, I think, like in Vancouver, where they charge upwards of $30,000. We're around between the business license and the permit, I believe it's $8,300 total, which is definitely high in terms of compared to what we currently do for other businesses. At the same time, it's a new business, and there's new costs and new challenges that arise. Now, the cost that we put forward is not to recover all of our costs. So as an example, there's likely a need for increased bylaw officers. That fee won't pay for bylaw officers. That's not the expectation. The cost that we are charging is a cost recovery within the department that issues those permits and licenses. There's a separate conversation independent of that that we've really been having, particularly with the province, around funding for those other pieces. So if Edmonton Police Service, they need, from what I understand, additional equipment to be able to test for tox if you've been driving and using cannabis. How does that impact you, and how do you test for that? So late last year, the federal government, originally the plan was to have the federal government receive 75% of the revenue, the province receive 25% of the revenue. Municipalities had made a suggestion saying we would like to obviously have a portion of that funding to help offset some of the costs we're dealing with. And so as an example, when we think about the enforcement, I believe on our end, it's I think around $900,000 for that personnel, that enforcement side of things. And the federal government had said that they were going to provide of their, that's overall 100%, and it was 25 for the provincial, 75 for the federal. It was going to be now 50 for the federal, 25 for the province. And with the expectation that that other 25 would go to the province but be given to the municipality for things like that. And so in Ontario, from what I understand, that money, once that announcement was made, was clearly flowed through to the municipalities. That hasn't been sorted out in Alberta yet, and I know we, through our discussions, I think we as a council passed a motion to have the mayor at a minimum write a letter, but potentially meet with provincial representatives to talk about that piece, because we're missing that portion of the funding, and I think that's an important part of this conversation. Again, it's a new world, and maybe what happens is there aren't major new costs incurred too, and so we have to be able to adjust. And but again, I think it's good to err on the side of being a little more cautious and then adjust as we go forward on this. So that's a little bit about the cannabis framework and policies. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, feel free to add some additional notes. Let's see, it's 7:31. We've got one more question coming in here. Oh, and Allison had also asked about the single-use plastic bag ban that's being suggested. So Councillor Henderson had put forward a notice of motion that will be debated, I think, this Friday at the Utility Committee, asking administration to do some research on the possibility of bringing in a plastic bag ban. So I know a number of cities, I think even Fort McMurray already does this, and I know there are other cities across Canada that have banned that single-use plastic bag. I don't feel I have enough information yet to give you a firm I support it or I don't. I think my gut reaction when I heard that is that I think originally I'd always been of the mindset that we see a large percentage of Edmontonians recycle, and because of that, we would assume that most of that's being diverted. At the same time, the single-use plastic bag or straws, I think, would be included in this, and any sort of those single-use plastic items. Maybe we are at that point now where it's become fairly common for most of us to bring a reusable bag. I think it's extremely rare for me.